Israelis launch a fresh wave of airstrikes on the Gaza Strip while continuing with their spree of arrests in the occupied West Bank. Egypt's president says that independence for Iraq's Kurds would be catastrophic. The Iraqi army kills dozens of insurgents as it makes further gains in its battle against militants belonging to the so-called Islamic State. And Ukraine's president hails the capture of a rebel stronghold as a turning point in the conflict as Kiev continues its assault in the east of the country. Hello there, you're watching the AEE TV World News and I'm Fatima Bassem. Israeli occupation forces are continuing to use excessive force against Palestinians both in the Gaza Strip and the West Bank. Israeli warplanes have launched around 10 air raids against targets in Gaza as Zionist troops detained dozens of protesters in the West Bank, where fury over the killing of a 16-year-old Palestinian is still raging.
More wrecking driven across the Gaza Strip. Israeli warplanes carried out a fresh wave of airstrikes against the coastal enclave, targeting around 10 locations. As Israeli occupation forces' aggression against Gaza continues to intensify, Hamas, the Palestinian resistance group, has retaliated by firing barrages of rockets into occupied territory.
I thought war had broken out. No one could leave their homes. Our house was damaged. Warplanes were flying above us.
We were in town. When we heard the explosions, they told us that the farms were targeted. We came and found that the land had gone. Nothing was left of it. As you can see, this is cultivation land. There are no training military camps here.
The Israelis are weighing their options with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, urging his cabinet to remain composed while handling the situation.
Experience proves that at such times we must act responsibly and with equanimity, not hastily. We will do whatever is necessary to restore quiet and security to the south.
Meanwhile, Israeli police claim to have arrested a group of Jewish extremists in connection with the kidnapping and murder of Palestinian teenager Mohammed Abu Khudair. The Shin Bet Internal Security Agency said the suspects were arrested on Sunday but did not release more details. Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas, for his part, called on the UN to form an international committee to look into the killing of the Palestinian youth at the hands of extremist Israeli settlers.
I have requested from Mr. Ban Ki-moon to form an international investigation committee into the terror crimes conducted against our people, including burning the teen Mohammed Abu Khudair alive. These criminal settler groups must be outlawed. They must become outlawed and illegal groups.
Israeli police also detained dozens of protesters overnight during clashes over the recent killing of Abu Khudair, a 16-year-old Palestinian who was tortured to death by Israeli extremists. Almost half of the detained protesters are minors. Clashes between Zionist forces and angry Palestinians have swept towns near the holy city of Al-Quds, with rage over Israeli violence fuming across occupied Palestine.
Let's now cross over to our Gaza correspondent Balsam Al-Atrash. Balsam, how have Palestinian resistance movements reacted to these Israeli provocations?
Yes, the Palestinians actually have fired around 12 rockets Sunday afternoon to Israeli towns adjacent to Gaza, which these rockets fell on a school compound this afternoon, causing no injuries. Also, the Israeli forces late Sunday fired several artillery shells at the southern Gaza Strip. The occupation forces decided today Sunday the closure of the Kerem Abu Salim crossing between the Gaza Strip and Israel in response to these rocket fire by the Palestinians. To make things clear, the Palestinians cannot just stand by and watch or be quiet regarding the actions that are happening in the West Bank. The Palestinians here in Gaza are responding or retaliating for the extremist groups' actions in the West Bank and the assaults on the Palestinian people over there. And now Israel claims that since of the kidnapping of the three settlers in Al-Khalid, around 200 rockets were fired from Gaza Strip towards Israel, 60 of them in the southern occupied Palestinian land and the Najaf area, which led to material damage and minor injuries among Israelis. Latest was the injury of an Israeli soldier. The persistent rocket fire by the Palestinians and the warplane raids and attacks by Israelis also came in despite of Egyptian efforts to broker a renewed truce between Israel and Hamas around Gaza following a flare-up of cross-border violence.
Yes, and is there fear among Gazans that Israelis will launch a major operation at any moment?
It is something, let's say, that is highly possible to occur, that an Israeli or a military operation will happen on the Gaza Strip. It is just a matter of timing. The Palestinians now are not clear when Israel will perform this military operation. The Israelis actually are in contrary, their actions are in contrary with what their statements are. They're claiming that they don't want a confrontation with Hamas, but at the same time deploy troops and soldiers to the Gazan borders and continue with the nightly air raids on training sites and open areas in the Gaza Strip. The Palestinians also, for their part, stress that no new confrontation with Israel is wanted. However, if an attack occurs, they need to retaliate and fire back with rockets, and the resistance is ready and will not hesitate to retaliate strongly to protect their land and people.
All right, thank you for those updates, our Gaza correspondent Balsam Al-Atrash. In another development, Tariq Abu Khudair, the 15-year-old American citizen who was brutally beaten by Israeli police and held in detention without medical treatment, has been released. An Israeli court discharged the American teenager of Palestinian descent on bail and ordered that he be placed on house arrest for 9 days. This comes after a video showing Israeli police brutally attacking Abu Khudair was broadcast. The Palestinian youth suffered injuries which were left untreated during his detention.
I was actually brutally attacked from the side and heard somebody screaming. They came and attacked me and actually went unconscious, and I woke up in the hospital.
I feel like he doesn't deserve to be on house arrest out of his own home for 9 days and have a bail. On what charges? He hasn't been charged. There's no charge on him. Why are you putting him on house arrest? Makes no sense. I'm American. I know the American law. This doesn't happen in America.
For a broad campaign in support of the Palestinian people who are being subjected to escalating Israeli attacks, the movement urged the Arab people to offer every possible support to the steadfast Palestinian people, who it said were defending all of us against the Zionist threat. The Resistance Party also slammed the utter silence of Arab regimes towards Israeli crimes, which it said was becoming worse by the day. Well, merchants in the old city of Al-Quds decried slow business and poor sales during this holy month of Ramadan. The salesmen have attributed the economic downturn to Israeli-imposed restrictions on travel for Palestinians.
Vendors in Al-Quds, who are selling food and desserts traditionally served for iftar meals during the Islamic holy month of Ramadan, say sales have plummeted and the market has failed to draw the increased activity traditionally attributed to the month-long fast. Abu Farid, a merchant in the old city, says traveling restrictions on Palestinians are to blame.
It's different from previous years. Look, it's like there's a curfew. Today there's no one. I make almonds, lemon and carrot juices, but there's no one to buy them.
Another merchant, selling cosmetics and beauty products, said the absence of West Bank Palestinians in Al-Quds had slashed his potential customer base.
There were people in Al-Quds. The West Bankers used to come to Al-Quds. Al-Quds was open, not like today. Today the situation is bad. The economy is shrinking and no one is coming.
Tensions have spiked in Al-Quds following the kidnapping and killing of 3 Israeli settlers in the occupied West Bank and the subsequent murder of a Palestinian teenager in Al-Quds. Traveling restrictions on Palestinians visiting Al-Quds during Ramadan means only men aged over 50 and women aged over 45 are allowed to cross into the city.
There is a loss of 60 to 70% if we compare it to last year. Last year was better because they were permits for West Bankers. They used to come and buy. The city was alive. This year is not good.
Ramadan falls on the 9th month of the lunar Islamic calendar and is Islam's holiest season. But for many living under the Israeli occupation, the time will be another daily struggle for survival.
The ongoing conflict has, of course, displaced millions over the past 6 decades. But now Palestinians living outside their homeland are going back to visit the West Bank as they embark on a mission to discover their heritage and history.
For most people, the words Palestine or West Bank don't shout holiday destination, but for these young teenagers traveling thousands of miles to embark on a tour designed to connect them to their homeland is better than perhaps traveling anywhere else in the world.
Or the West, children are considered under 18, but here...
These Palestinian youths who reside in the United States, Australia, Canada, France and Italy have come to the West Bank for a 2-week tour to learn about their heritage.
My name is Ana Giselle Cafie. I was born in Honduras. Now I'm living in Italy, and my family is originally from Ramallah.
The delegates come from families who left Haifa, Al Khalil, occupied Al-Quds, Gaza, Ramallah, and 20 other towns and villages in the occupied Palestinian lands.
It's both beautiful and grotesque. The place is beautiful and the occupation is grotesque, so it's a mix of feelings.
I'm Muhammad Ahmed Mahmoud Saleh. I live currently in New York, but I was born in Jordan, and my family is originally from 2 villages between Ramla and Jerusalem called Beit Jiz and Deir al-Hawa that were destroyed during 1948.
According to NGO estimates, 70% of the Palestinian diaspora of around 10 million people has been forced out of Palestine. This new generation returning to their homeland is hoping that by cherishing the past, they may also see a better future.
Egyptian President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi warned that a referendum on the independence of Iraq's Kurdish region would lead to a catastrophic breakup of the country. Sisi, whose country is also facing a growing rise in militant attacks, told journalists that Kurdish calls for independence would only divide Iraq into smaller rival states. The Egyptian leader went on to claim that he warned the US and Europe against providing any aid to the Islamic State militants, saying they will target other countries in the Arab world, including Egypt and Saudi Arabia. Amid the parliamentary deadlock over the formation of a new government, Iraq's powerful Shia cleric Muqtada Sadr has urged the ruling State of Law coalition to choose a new candidate for the post of Prime Minister. Meanwhile, the Islamic Republic of Iran, a close ally of the Baghdad government, has also been weighing in on the political paralysis. Tehran reiterated its support for Premier Nouri al-Maliki's bid for a 3rd term in office. However, it added that it was ready to back any other candidate chosen by the parliament in Baghdad. Well, an Iraqi military spokesman announced that the country's security forces were yet to verify the authenticity of a video purporting to show the reclusive leader of the Islamic State militant group. The video, which has already been dismissed as bogus by some Iraqi officials, claims to show Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi in his first public appearance at the Grand Mosque in Iraq's second largest city of Mosul. The 21-minute video was released on Saturday and comes after Baghdadi was declared Caliph of the Islamic State, which the group claims stretches from Syria to northwestern Iraq.
The security forces are verifying the videotape to interpret the information. The security forces have files regarding the terrorist Ibrahim Awad Ibrahim al-Badri, known as al-Baghdadi, the leader of the Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant. We also have important information about the terrorist since he assumed the leadership of ISIL, or the so-called Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant, in the middle of 2010. We will declare the details to the media as soon as the information is confirmed.
Meanwhile, the Iraqi army is continuing with its military operations to root out insurgents in its nationwide battle against Islamic State militants. This as the army reported militant advances in Anbar, Salah ad-Din, Nainawa and Diyala provinces.
Fighting between the Iraqi army and extremist militants is continuing unabated. The Iraqi Air Force has launched airstrikes against Al-Qaeda-linked militants as they attempted to attack the Spiker Air Base in Salah ad-Din province, killing dozens of militants. According to a military official, the army was able to foil an assault by the so-called Islamic State militants, who have been launching attacks on the base since last night. Meanwhile, in the vicinity of the Beji oil refinery, at least 30 extremists were killed during their offensive, according to the spokesman for the commander-in-chief of the armed forces. Militants have used new methods in their attack on the refinery by arming a number of bulldozers. This as military operations in the province are moving ahead, with security forces continuing to clear the Auja area from militants, killing 14 and destroying their vehicles in the Shishan Valley area in central Tikrit. Regarding the operations in Baghdad's belt areas, security services have managed through the last 48 hours to kill the emir of the Mishahda area north of Baghdad and a number of his aides. Meanwhile, in the province of Babel, 5 militants were killed in the Jurf al-Sakr area north of Babel, and the security forces were still working to clear a number of regions. During the last 48 hours, the Iraqi Air Force has launched airstrikes in Tal Afar and Tal Tasa north of Baghdad, in Qa'im in western Anbar province, and a number of areas of Diyala province, killing dozens of IS militants.
Let's now cross over to Mustafa Al-Qattan, our Iraq correspondent. Mustafa, if you could update us on the latest military operations by the Iraqi army against militants.
Yes, the Iraqi army still continuing his bid to dislodge the militants from the city of Tikrit in Salah ad-Din province, while simultaneously launched another attacks on the militant hideouts in Diyala and also in Tal Afar city, where the militants are controlling large swathes of territories in these two provinces. Also, the Iraqi army actually today he battled militants belong to the so-called Islamic State in the north of Babel province, especially in Jurf al-Sahar, where the militants tried to kill some Iraqi soldiers. In Baghdad, actually, a few hours before a few hours, a suicide bomber detonated himself in a busy market on the civilians, and the attack killed 2 civilians and severely injured other 6. Another suicide bomber tried to blow himself up on a military checkpoint in Darat district, but it had been killed by the Iraqi army in the south city of Baghdad. Yes.
Yes, and tell us about the importance of the Spiker military base. We know that militants are trying to recapture the base in Salah ad-Din.
Yes. Spiker and military base, it was American military base, and now it is occupied or taken by the Iraqi army, and they use it as a recruiting center and also a store for the ammunition, and also a military base. Militants for several times tried to attack this base in order to take it or to overrun it, but fortunately the Iraqi army, with the support of the Iraqi Air Force, managed to repel them and to kill several militants in their latest hit yesterday when they tried to seize the base. Yes.
All right, thank you for those updates, Mustafa Al-Qattan, our correspondent in Iraq. A new report by the Lebanese Internal Security Forces revealed that terrorist cells are gearing up to attack several targets in the country. Leaked security documents obtained by the Lebanese Ad-Diyar Daily said that militants from the Islamic State are planning attacks against Shia and Christian villages in the northern Beqa Valley. In next-door Syria, the Islamic State has expelled more than 30,000 people from their homes in the eastern town of Shohel. This as Syrian army units continue to make fresh gains across northern and western parts of the country.
Extremist fighters from the Islamic State are continuing to carry out systematic abuses against civilians in Syria, this time in the oil-rich province of Deir ez-Zor. The British-based Syrian Observatory for Human Rights reported that IS had forced out some 30,000 residents after seizing Shuhail on Thursday from the Al-Qaeda-affiliated Al-Nusra Front. In their post on the social media site Facebook, activists from Shuhail said IS had ordered all residents to leave. The posts also described the militant fighters as cowards. Activists said residents feared IS fighters planned to loot their homes, adding that the large displacement had left thousands sleeping in the open, with food and water shortages. Elsewhere in the region, the group said negotiations were underway over the fate of some 83,000 people living in 3 towns in Deir ez-Zor, after IS militants advanced in the surrounding areas. But the radical group is not the only one making advances. Further north, the Syrian army is also on the move. Army units have secured contested territory across the province of Aleppo, namely in the Al-Sakur and Al-Rashdin districts, killing and injuring several foreign-backed fighters. Military sources have also reported advancements on the Qalamun front in the Damascus countryside. Syrian troops conducted search and destroy operations in the Rankus plains, further tightening their grip around the country's capital.
You're watching Al Ittijah World News, still to come. At least 29 people are killed in a new militant attack in Kenya's coastal region. Welcome back to AEE TV World News. Here's a reminder of our top stories. The Israelis launch a fresh wave of airstrikes on the Gaza Strip while continuing with their spree of arrests in the occupied West Bank. Egypt's president says that independence for Iraq's Kurds would be catastrophic. The Iraqi army kills dozens of insurgents as it makes further gains in its battle against militants belonging to the so-called Islamic State. And Ukraine's president hails the capture of a rebel stronghold as a turning point in the conflict as Kiev continues its assault in the east of the country. Ukrainian President Petro Poroshenko has called the recapture of the eastern town of Slavyansk as a turning point in the fight against pro-Russian separatists. However, following their pullout from their former stronghold, rebels are reportedly regrouping in Donetsk, preparing for a potential showdown with troops loyal to Kiev.
Today, on July 5th, Ukrainian armed forces and National Guard liberated Slavyansk from terrorists. Today, the Ukrainian flag is again flying above town which armed militants considered unapproachable fortress. Yes, it is not a full victory yet, and not a reason to celebrate with fireworks, though the clearing of Slavyansk from the heavily armed gang of criminals has an important symbolic meaning. It is the turning point in the fight with armed militants for the territorial integrity of Ukraine, for the return of the normal life to Donbass, which is an inseparable part of our great, strong European Ukraine.
The recent successes by Kiev's troops in former rebel strongholds like Slavyansk appear to have spurred on their so-called anti-terrorist operations. In the latest round of fighting, Kiev's artillery attacked the eastern Ukrainian city of Luhansk, reportedly killing 2 civilians and wounding 4 others.
Anti-terrorist forces are used at full capacity. Today you can see liberated towns, such as Slavyansk and Kramatorsk. These towns are returning to normal life.
But there is nothing normal about life for these people. Black smoke rose while the sound of artillery and gunfire rang out throughout Luhansk. Meanwhile, residents, fearing for their lives, rushed to bomb shelters. Most people here are fed up with the persistent brutality demonstrated on the part of the Kiev government and its forces in recent weeks.
We didn't elect the president. Who needs a president who kills people?
We all are in shock, not under stress, but in a real shock. It is necessary to cease fighting and to find some kind of a settlement.
There are others here who are caught in the crossfire, but have decided to take matters into their own hands. These people are collecting signatures, appealing to the UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon to stop Kiev's aggression against innocent civilians.
The aim of the appeal is to call on Petro Poroshenko to start peace talks, to stop mass slaughter of Ukrainian civilians by the Ukrainian army. Unfortunately, we do not appeal to Petro Poroshenko directly, because we do not see any sense in doing that, and we do not believe he will listen to us. That's why our last hope is to appeal to international organizations.
And while Kiev's troops raised the Ukrainian flag over the bombed-out city of Slavyansk after rebel troops abandoned their positions there, the separatists remain in full control of Donetsk and Luhansk. And now with the pro-Russian rebels regrouping, it seems that a major showdown between the two sides is in the making.
Let's now speak to Alina Malinovskaya for more on Ukraine. She is a Moscow-based journalist. Alina, where does the surge in violence put the prospects of a peaceful solution in eastern Ukraine?
Well, there was a number of high-level conference calls this weekend from the key European countries, and they all failed to persuade President Poroshenko not to launch major attacks on opposition forces in eastern Ukraine. And Washington seemed to be alone in voicing for Poroshenko's decision. They were the only one who supported him. And today, after 8 p.m. Moscow time, the confrontation between the self-defense forces and Ukrainian forces has indeed intensified in the suburbs of Lugansk. And heavy aircraft could be heard flying above Lugansk, and a siren went off. The attack happened the same day Kyiv said it would not bombard armed groups in Lugansk and Donetsk from the air. So there's there's still more escalation coming from Ukrainian part, as we see.
Yes, and will the withdrawal of self-defense units in Slavyansk and the relocation to Donetsk effectively change the dynamics of the conflict? Kiev's leaders seem to believe that it was a major turning point.
I just heard recently that journalists came across a plan, a document that was allegedly prepared by specialists of the U.S. Strategic Research Center. And this document includes stages of punitive action, punitive operation in eastern Ukraine. I'm not going to describe all of the stages of the plan, but in general, what happens now is very much looks like it fits the scenario of the plan. Like Poroshenko has chosen a dangerous course by seeking a military solution to Ukraine's political crisis and possibly trying to provoke Moscow to intervene to protect ethnic Russians.
Yes, and President Poroshenko has been a month in office with really little to show. How does this advance benefit him with his Western allies?
The European Union and Russia showed that he's not completely independent figure inside the system of political power in Ukraine, because he is still under the influence from certain radical groups there, the so-called semi-fascist forces that are reportedly supportive of him and that backed him to win the presidential elections. And that is why the military troops in Ukraine are not well organized, and they are not coordinated, and consequently they are having troubles to disrupt the peace talks. They are ineffective with these groups. This is why there's more devastation, and more devastation we might see in the future.
And do you think that Moscow will stay on the sidelines as more and more Russian-speaking nationals are being killed? What are officials in the Kremlin saying?
Well, basically there was no hard line in this regard, and since the Ukrainian part is still escalating this conflict, we might just see some more decisive actions from the Kremlin, from the Moscow side, but we still hope that the negotiations will make it possible for de-escalation of the conflict. But there are majorities in the eastern Ukraine who are expressing distrust to the President Poroshenko and especially to the U.S. interference in the conflict. They don't want to integrate economically with the European Union, and they don't want to make sacrifices for the sake of economic reforms. And so in this complex situation, Poroshenko has to find ways and to unleash the full-scale war against his own citizens, and to end this confrontation with Russia.
Yes, and don't you think that the constant fighting in eastern Ukraine is inevitable there, as long as the territory remains a grey area, neither answering to Kiev nor Moscow?
Of course, it is inevitable. It will take a lot of time to settle down, if it will settle down at all. But with the interference from the Western powers, from the West, from the IMF, which is trying to influence as well. This is still harder to do, and I can quote, for example, a recent IMF report saying that that should the central government lose effective control over the east of Ukraine, the program will need to be redesigned. What they mean is that they're going to cut the money they were going to pay to Ukraine, or just completely take it off this decision. And this was reported by the agency France Press. This redesign basically means that they will get no money, or much less than they expected. So the government in Kyiv, whose legitimacy is already in deep doubt, is pushed to wage one more anti-terrorist operation with the use of tanks, heavy machinery, aircrafts, and what they're doing now is they devastating the country, and they are acting against their own civilians.
All right,
citizens.
All right, Moscow-based journalist Alina Malyovskaya, thank you for sharing your thoughts on this. Now off to Yemen, where a short-lived truce was broken on Saturday. As fierce clashes have once again erupted between Houthi fighters and al-Qaeda-linked militants backed by government forces in the northern province of Amran. Our Yemeni correspondent Mohammed Al-Attab has the details.
Fierce clashes have erupted once again between Houthi fighters and al-Qaeda-linked militants backed by the Yemeni army in the northern province of Amran, breaking yet another short-lived truce. The militants, largely comprising of local tribesmen, are believed to be linked to al-Qaeda and supported by government troops, namely the 310 military brigades. The Yemeni army first bombarded Houthi fighters north of the capital Sana'a. Exact figures for the number of casualties are yet to be released.
The militants of al-Qaeda supported by the army have breached the last ceasefire agreement, which was signed under the auspices of President Hadi and the Minister of Defense. Yet Islah militants and Ali Muhsin, President's military advisor, have refused to implement such agreement and continued their attacks on the citizens of Amran.
Political observers expect that the conflict is set to last longer, this time in comparison to previous confrontations, particularly as the fresh round of fighting is more volatile. Extremist militants from different areas of Marib have attacked Houthi residents in the Al-Jawf governorate, risking the expansion of the clashes.
The massive influx of Takfiri fighters in Al-Jawf supported by army forces resembles the tactics of ISIL attacks in Iraq and Syria. It seems that Takfiris in Yemen are encouraged by the advancements of their branches in Iraq, but our fighters in Al-Jawf have taught them a great lesson and has inflicted heavy losses on them.
This comes as demonstrations are being staged more frequently to call on Yemeni President Abdurrabbu Mansour Hadi to put an end to the bloodshed. Protesters have also demanded the president, who has been dubbed as the US's best ally in the region regarding the so-called war on terror, to denounce the growing aggression against Amran.
We took to the streets, coming from different regions of Yemen, in support with our brothers in Amran, who are being subject to the growing Takfiri aggressions, supported by the Brotherhood branch in Yemen and all traditional military leaders.
Political analysts say that with the conflict spreading out to include what is currently referred to as the federal state of Sabah, which includes Al-Jawf, Marib and Al-Bayda, all of which are oil-rich regions, Yemen's sectarian war is closely resembling what is currently taking place in Iraq, especially following the attack against a Saudi border post. With Yemen officially declaring a seventh war on Houthi fighters, observers say the Iraqi scenario could reoccur in Yemen unless the fighting sides agree on a lasting peace deal and actually implement it. Mohammed Al-Attab, Al-Ittijah TV, Sana'a.
Torrential rains are battering several regions across central and southern China, stranding residents in the area. Rescue operations are underway to evacuate the people caught up in the ensuing floods. So far, a total of 1,172 residents in China's central Hunan province were evacuated since Saturday after the torrential rains and massive landslides led to the formation of a barrier lake. 6 people were killed and 36 others injured after a bus overturned in southwest China late on Saturday. 5 of the injured are said to be in critical condition and are being treated in nearby hospitals. The cause of the accident remains unknown and is being investigated by authorities. Ugandan troops have killed 41 people near the border with the Democratic Republic of Congo. According to reports, attacks in the western district of Uganda resulted in dozens of casualties, with children believed to be among the dead. The clashes come hours after the army announced it had killed a man suspected of being involved in an attack on a church in the border region 2 weeks earlier. At least 29 people have been killed in 2 separate attacks by the Al-Qaeda-linked Al-Shabaab group on Kenya's coastal region of Lamu. Local sources said a group of gunmen stormed a police station and a trading center, killing at least 9 people, including several civilians. Last month, more than 60 people were killed by the militant group in the coastal district. In Sudan, the holy month of Ramadan has a slightly different feeling. Apart from fasting prayers, religious classes and open-air iftar feasts, works of charity and other voluntary fundraising events are common in the 30 million-strong nation where Muslims make up the overwhelming majority of the population.
Every year, Muslims all over the world mark the holy month of Ramadan, the 9th month of the lunar calendar. Ramadan is the holiest occasion of the year, culminating in the grand festival of Eid al-Fitr.
There are a number of ways of social solidarity throughout Ramadan, including the fasting people's gift bags, charity provided to the poor, and clothes to those in need.
In Ramadan, Muslims come together for a lengthy evening prayer known as Taraweeh, which is not normally a part of everyday prayers. In Ramadan, Muslims seek the satisfaction of Allah Almighty through different worship acts, including fasting, which they break around sunset. And in Sudan, that is done in a spectacular and unrivaled fashion. Exercising religion in Sudan is the same as in every Muslim country. However, there are different traditions which only the Sudanese practice. Families take their food and choose a spot on the public street alongside 20 or 30 other families from their neighborhood, sit on opposing sides and break their fast upon Maghrib prayers.
This is a Sudanese habit that has been entrenched in Sudanese traditions for ages. We find that the Sudanese around breakfast time stop people on the roads and streets so that they can host these passers-by. This is an integral part of the Sudanese generosity.
The purpose of eating out is to allow passers-by and those who have not yet made it home to have a place where they could break their fast. This does not only take place in local roads, but in highways as well.
Maybe half an hour before breakfast time at sunset, highways become almost impossible to travel through, given that they will be blocked by people who invite you, a traveler, to eat with them. This is one of the traditions that will never disappear despite any circumstance that may arise.
What used to be a traditional habit is now turned into a charitable practice. Organizations are now on the scene providing help during Ramadan.
Several people need a meal during the month, and that is how the idea came into being, the idea of using collective iftar as an organized effort for charity.
The activity of such charities is geared up to include more places in the future.
We want to focus our effort in the future on including prisons and major hospitals on our target list.
Eating and drinking after a long day is a joy. However, doing so with such company is even merrier. Ahmed Saeed Ahmed, Al-Ittijah News Channel, Khartoum.
In what many are saying is a major setback for Brazil's World Cup hopes, the team lost superstar striker Neymar after he fractured a vertebra during his side's 2-1 quarter-final win over Colombia.
After an unconvincing start to the World Cup, hosts Brazil move one step closer to the final with a 2-1 win over Colombia. Captain Thiago Silva scored early off a corner kick, and defender David Luiz netted a brilliant free kick in the 69th minute.
It was a great game. We will manage to become champions. I'll be there on July 13th in Maracana, God willing.
Colombia's James Rodriguez pulled one back from the penalty spot with his 6th goal of the tournament late in the second half. But it wasn't enough to keep the Colombians in the tournament. Brazil move on to the World Cup semi-final, but they'll be missing 2 of their best players. Silva was booked for a second time in the tournament, which means he's suspended for the next game. And superstar Neymar is out with a back injury after a crunching tackle from Colombia's Juan Zuniga just 2 minutes before the final whistle.
My first reaction was sadness when I heard that he'd broken a vertebra and that he would no longer be part of the cup. But Brazil won, and we will be champions. And we're still united, and Brazil will be champion for a 6th time.
Brazil faced Germany next after they beat France 1-0 in the other quarter-final. Tuesday's match will be a repeat of the 2002 final, which Brazil won 2-0.
Here's a reminder of our top stories. The Israelis launch a fresh wave of airstrikes on the Gaza Strip while continuing with their spree of arrests in the occupied West Bank. Egypt's president says that independence for Iraq's Kurds would be catastrophic. The Iraqi army kills dozens of insurgents as it makes further gains in the battle against militants belonging to the so-called Islamic State. And Ukraine's president hails the capture of a rebel stronghold as a turning point in the conflict as Kiev continues its assault in the east of the country. Well, that's all from me and the AEE TV news team. Thank you for watching and good night.